Good evening, everyone. My name is Rira, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual event with Edward Farmer, who is here to present his debut novel, Pale. We're so grateful that you're spending your Friday evening with us and that we're able to continue bringing authors and their works to our community during this time of social distancing. And before I introduce Edward, I do have some announcements and quick guidelines for tonight's event. Our next virtual event is a conversation between authors Ginger Gaffney and Pam Houston. They will be discussing their memoirs, Half Broke and Deep Creek, on Tuesday, May 26th at 6 p.m. For regular updates on upcoming events, please check out our calendar on our website and subscribe to our newsletter. This evening's event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for Edward to answer, please vote for it. It will bring the question up to the top of the list, and we'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. And also some good news, our bookstore is accepting curbside pickup, so yay. And with that said, let me introduce Edward. Let me introduce our guest author for this evening. Edward Farmer is a native of Memphis, Tennessee, where he journaled and cultivated stories his entire childhood. He is a graduate of Amherst College with a degree in English and psychology, and is the recipient of the MacArthur Leithauser Travel Award for Creative Writing. Pale is his first novel. So I'm going to turn things over to Edward and his agent, Annie Baumke, who will be saying some words about the book. So sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Baumke. I'm Edward Farmer's literary agent, as Vera said. And Ed just asked me to kind of kick off the evening by saying a few words. As an agent, I get roughly 3,000 submissions a year. And of that, I usually end up representing about 4 or 5 people. And what I always ask for up front is a query letter, synopsis, and the first 2 chapters. And usually what I do is I just kind of skim the query because I don't really care about that as much as the actual writing of the book. To me, the writing is really, you can write a wonderful query letter, but then not being able to write an actual book. So to me, the writing is really what's most important. And I remember when I started reading Pale, it was just, I was immediately pulled in by the language of it. It was so beautiful. The imagery was just so, it was so emotional and it was so vivid that I just kind of immediately fell in love with the writing. And then from there, I really got pulled into the characters and I just sort of became immediately worried for them because it's such a tenuous situation they're living in. It's such a dangerous kind of line that they need to walk, especially Bernice, who is the protagonist, which I will tell you about. And I was just turning the pages to try to find out, would they make it through this okay? Because it was just, it seemed like such a dangerous situation for them. And part of what I loved about it was that it was so psychologically rich, the characters. There was so much depth to them. Because, you know, like the missus of the story is sort of the villain of the story. And, you know, even she had a lot of depth to her, which I feel like, you know, it's very easy to write kind of like a Bond villain who's just evil for the sake of being evil. But then to write a villain that is not likable, but is understandable. You can actually recognize kind of why they're doing what they're doing. To me, that has depth and nuance and it's special. So that's part of what I loved about it, just that all the characters had such richness to them. They had such kind of life. And I remember when I finished the book, it was just, suddenly I didn't realize that I had been holding my breath And when I read the last sentence, I actually just I sat back and I let out this big breath because it had just been such an epic journey. And it had been so, just so many emotions, so many events, especially at the end. It has a wonderful twist, which I will not give away. So yeah, I just loved it. And so I called Ed and I offered to represent him. And we started on edits. And very fortunate that I also live in Southern California. So I suggested to Ed that we get lunch. I would come up to LA and we could get lunch. And I've had other situations where I met authors who I had a good rapport with online, which Ed and I had a great rapport through email, and then I had met these people in person and it was just kind of weird and awkward. So I didn't really know what to expect when we went to get lunch. And it was just like, it was meeting somebody for the first time, but almost feeling like you just immediately are friends and just have a connection. I remember we talked about everything. We talked about the book. We talked about the ending scene. I remember we talked about high school and the time that we really got in trouble with our moms. And it was just, we talked so long that they were closing the restaurant around us. They were like wiping down the tables and stuff. And so it was just so sweet. So I'm just so thrilled that finally people are getting to read this book that I have been in love with for years. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you for those nice words too. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I first want to start off with thanking Vroman's Bookstore for hosting this event. This is my local bookstore. Not only is it the oldest and largest independent bookstore in Southern California, but it's also my local bookstore here in Pasadena. So I find myself walking to Vroman's a couple times a week and just browsing the aisles when we could do that. And hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon. But I just want to thank Vroman's for hosting this event. And I also want to encourage everyone to support your local bookstores and to support Vroman's during this time. And as it was mentioned, the purchase pail icon is right there on the screen, and it would be great if we could support Vroman's tonight. So it's great to be here. I also have to thank my wonderful publisher, Blackstone Publishing. I think people say this a lot. They speak about their publisher and they say they're amazing, they're great, but it's so true. From the moment I signed with Blackstone Publishing, it was a family. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of naming individual people because I'll forget one, I know it. However, I just want to thank the Blackstone family for welcoming me in and treating me so kindly during my debut. So it's been really great. So even though I said I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, I just quickly want to go down that rabbit hole. And I want to thank someone in particular at Blackstone, and that is my cover designer. Catherine English has been absolutely amazing. She designed a book cover that is stunning. It's flawless. Everyone who sees it, they say it's beautiful. And I really do feel that she captured the spirit of my novel. In addition to her, I have to thank someone who's not at Blackstone Publishing, and that's Hakeem Hill, who he took my author photo. And that's not an easy task to do because I'm not the I'm not the best person in front of a camera. And so he worked really hard to capture a picture that captured my personality as well. And so I'm really grateful to him as well. And then I have to thank, the thank yous are not going to last forever, but I do have to thank my agent, Annie Bumpke, not just for her kind words at the beginning, but also she really is, she was a lifesaver for me. I was at a low point in my writing journey when I received a call from Annie. I was actually working on a second novel. I was working really hard and I was sort of struggling one day, and I took a walk and I went to the vitamin store and I received a call from Annie. And we spoke for a very long time. And it was just great at that point to not be alone in this journey of trying to become a writer. And at that point, I had a partner. And not only did I have a partner, I had a partner who cared as much about my work as I did. And she was someone who, she cared as much for the language as I did. The details she gave with our revision, it made Pale what it is today. And I'm really grateful for her support and even her speaking tonight. It just makes me really proud, and I'm very happy to have her on my side. I have to thank my mom and my brother, who I know my brother's watching. I hope my mom got the video to work and that she's watching too. We're not known for our technical savvy, so I think my mom is watching, but their support is really great. And now I just want to rattle off a few names, because I said I wouldn't do this, but I want to rattle off a few names at the back of the book in the acknowledgments part. Just give me 1 second. Okay, few names: Jen Brown, Julian Frey, Laura Schuyler, Michael Hibbler, Edgar Martinez, Dahlia Guillen, Jamie Biggs, Francisco Tejas, Tonatiuh Juarez, and Kai Love, and many more. I want to highlight the many more. These are the names that are at the back of the book, but the many more is where the heart of the matter is, because I'm not alone in my apartment, even though it seems like it. I actually have a few people hanging out here, some balloons, and they're having some drinks. One of those people is Trinidad Cisneros. I have to thank Monica Barrett, who calls me every day and says, you need to post on social media, because she knows I hate it. And then I also have to thank just everyone out there who supported this, who's bought the book, who wants to buy the book, who wishes they could buy the book. If you wish you could buy it, you can't afford it, let me know. Just things like that. I want to thank everyone. And then the final thank you, I want to thank Jay Stiles, the executive producer and creator of the Amazon Prime Video series, Become Inspired. He was gracious enough to invite me on season 2 of this amazing show. And I don't thank him because of that, which is great, but I thank him because I have watched this show on repeat and episodes from Christina Bryant and Will Hollis, and I need this during this time because I'm excited, but I also need to stay motivated. And so I just want to thank Jay Stiles and this amazing feat he's done. He's accomplished amazing things, and he invited me in on that journey. And I just want to say thank you to him. All right, so I think the thank yous are done. I think I did that. I just want to talk very briefly about this process of becoming a writer. As Annie said, agents receive thousands of letters each year of people trying to receive representation. And I had been on that list of people trying to receive representation. And the journey was long and it was hard. And when I finally signed with Annie, it was the fulfillment of a dream, because I had wanted to be a writer since I was a little boy. And this isn't a long speech about me wanting to be a writer since I was a boy. However, it was my dream. And it was a dream that wasn't necessarily coming to pass as quickly as I wanted. And it took a long time. I graduated from college in 2005, and my book is coming out in 2020. It's out now. So it was 15 years of work and struggle. So I want to thank Annie Bumpkin, acknowledge, someone brought me a drink, so that's good. I want to just acknowledge that this process has been very long. And even Pale has been a work in progress for a very long time. It's great to see it out now, but this has been years. And it's been years of Annie and I working together and trying to make this dream come true. And the fact that it's finally here, I could not be more excited. I want to talk about, give you a little insight into Pale. I couldn't have written Pale earlier than I did. I thought in 2005 that I would become this great writer because I had the skills, but I think I needed to know more. I needed to read more. And I was thinking about that earlier today, that in the writing journey, there's something to have the skills. I think I was developing my skills, but I don't think I knew enough. I needed to know more about people, more about their motivations, more about myself in order to write Pale. And at the heart of Pale, it's a search for identity and understanding yourself. And I don't think I could have written it if I didn't know myself and hadn't gone through that journey of trying to understand myself and who I am. And then I could write about a young Black boy's journey into understanding who he is and his identity, especially when surrounded by such chaos as he was. So I'm appreciative that the novel is coming out now, and I'm appreciative that it was given to me at the time that it was given to me, because as many people know, Pale came from a dream. I was laid off from my job, and I was doing a lot of writing, but I wasn't writing a novel. And I had this dream, and in the dream, there was a woman who turned out to be the main character, Bernice, and the people, she worked for a white family, and the people of the house treated her mean. From that, I woke up and I started to write, and the story really did write itself. I tell people that the characters came to life, the story wrote itself, and it was a story that I cared about because it takes place in Greenwood, Mississippi, which is where my father's side of the family is from. And so to write about a place that I love very much, and I've been there, and I love the drive to Greenwood, and I love being in Greenwood. It meant a lot to me to be able to tell a story about that place. So I just want to go through a few of the characters, and then I want to read some sections of the book that really stood out for me and that means something to me, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So at the heart of the story is the Kern family. This is the family that Bernice, that main character who goes to work for a white family, she goes to work for the Kern family, and it consists of George Kern and Miss Lula, also known as the Mrs. She has this title as the Mrs. Most of the book. And then, so that's one family, because these are family dramas that we're dealing with here. So one family is the Kern family. The next family is Silva. She's a house servant, and it's Silva and her two sons, Jesse and Fletcher. They are cotton pickers who come to the farm the same summer that Bernice arrives to the farm, and they come as cotton pickers. And then finally, you have Bernice and her brother Floyd. And Floyd is the person who invites Bernice to come work with him on the plantation when her husband leaves, and he's supposed to send for her, but never does. Okay, so with that said, I will now read a few sections, very brief sections from the book. And I just want to give a little insight into what my thinking was with each of these sections. So the first part, I think the first part is in chapter 1, actually. With this novel, I talk a lot about place. As I've been speaking to people about what my idea was in writing it, I really wanted to give a sense of place. I can't say enough how much I love Tennessee, how much I love Mississippi, and how much I love writing about those places. And so this short part I want to read, I hope gives you a sense of place. That was the purpose of this in the first chapter of the book. Floyd knew those parts better than most, and as such, knew the good from the bad like he knew the back of his own hand, and mine too, let him tell it. Although it was late summer, it was still hot, the date on the calendar meaning nothing when it came to Mississippi and heat. The plantation went for miles in both directions. One of those places where there was nothing, then something, then nothing again for acres at a time. 90 miles from Jackson, 30 miles from the nearest interstate, tossed out there amongst the coyotes and armadillos, the cotton capital of the world, they called it. It bears a starkness that can only be said to exist in the furthest reaches of one's imagination, as one would picture hell to be if it were an actual place on this earth that one could see and feel, a wolf in sheep's clothing, Daddy would say, an aphorism that for only that reason remains a jewel. The rain dries quickly, the ground a pillow bed, the marsh a thirsty bowl, those cotton sheets a white covering for the night, lulling so gently and quietly into my ears. Nothing ever happened except for the rain and plows, or maybe a loud truck occasionally came roaring down the street, or if we were lucky, a car passed with blaring music, but nothing stirred in the fields. This brief section right there, I think Annie and I really loved that part because I wanted to give a sense of place at the very beginning. I wanted people to know where they were. And it's a quiet place oftentimes. Nothing happens. You will hear plows, you will hear a car going down the road, but for the most part, it's quiet. And I wanted to establish that sense of quiet at the very beginning. And I think that part meant a lot for me and Andy as well, as we were trying to establish a sense of place at the very beginning of the book. The next part I want to read is, it's actually in chapter 3. It's in chapter 3. And this part, as you know, as some people know, actually, I should say that, the story sort of kicks off. It really gets going when the missus of the house starts flirting with Jesse. When she flirts with Jesse, one of Silva's boys, it starts a dangerous game that threatens the lives of everyone. And so this is a brief scene of when they first see each other. And what I really wanted to capture here was that spark of seeing someone and having a feeling. And I wanted to capture it in a subtle way, but I wanted it to be recognizable. So the missus is having one of her fits. She has episodes, and this is following one of her episodes. As if given permission to finally let go, Miss Lula began to convulse and shake with the protection of Silva's guiding arms around her. Bernice, Silva commanded in full control. You get that side. Just make sure she don't hit nothing. Beside the flailing child, I stooped with my arms out, not necessarily sure of what I was guarding against. It was long, this one, longer than any other fit I'd seen the missus have, which made that day appear all the more cumbersome in comparison to other days in the fields, where not much happened besides the cotton and the heat, as we picked and chopped and sang and grunted the repetition all day. What seemed an eternity was no more than a minute, although the missus's body remained a trembling wreck that still hinted of the fit she'd endured. Over the chaos of her involuntary spasms and kicks and screams, which still emerged every so often, came the sight of Jesse's face tucked far in the distance, his warm eyes awash at sea in panic, a timidity in him I had never seen before, although I knew it to always be present in children. The convulsions lasted for several more seconds before they finally ceased for good, and the missus fell limp to any cause. Silva then eased the missus back in her chair, Miss Lula's arms falling over its supports as her head reared back like that of a drunk. When the missus did finally open her eyes for the first time by her own cognizance, she looked about the room wildly. It's okay, Silva insisted, holding the missus' shoulders and soothing her gently. Silva, the poor woman called out wretchedly. You couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Yes, miss, Silva said. Silva turned to Jesse and whispered sternly, Jesse, you gets back to your duties. And like that, just as Jesse turned to leave, I saw it, that momentary fix they had on one another, which Silva did not see, that chance meeting of their eyes as Jesse and Miss Lula encountered each other for the first time in years, separated by only a decade or two, excited like passing puppies on the street. Jesse noticed my attention on him and left the room quietly without another peek, his feet much softer than they had been when he first entered the house. As I said before, that section right there really meant a lot to me as I thought about what it meant to be in a situation where you see someone for the first time and you probably shouldn't. You probably shouldn't stare. You shouldn't. It's inappropriate to look at this person, but there's something there, and I wanted to capture it in the best way possible. And so that scene meant a lot to me, just for them to see each other for the first time and then to see what progresses after that. The next part I want to read, it's a short part as well, and it's actually my last part I want to read. It it shows Fletcher, who is Silva's other son. And a big part of this book for me is the rules that define your upbringing. So if you live in Alaska, the rules for surviving the winter are one thing. If you live in Florida, your rules for surviving the winter are completely different. Well, the same goes for if you are a minority. If you're an African American, you have certain rules, and your parents teach those rules to you. This is a scene in the book where you see Silva. She sees her son growing older, and the fear is there as she sees that these rules have been taught, but we all grow up and we choose to do what we want. And this scene right here really shows Fletcher finding his voice. I joined the rally down there too, Fletcher said. That's the first thing he says to me when he come home, Silva spat, her words of condemnation. All this time and he still don't know how to talk. It was in her eyes, that fear and fire, that anguish that only a mother knows from the emptiness of her womb and now her arms. Lord knows I had placed these thoughts far from my mind, that hearing them made it even more difficult to bear. Fletcher shrugged his shoulders. Ain't nothing wrong with it, he said. I see you've outgrown your britches, I said to him. You got a larger pair of shoes and somehow think you're wiser. Miss Burney, you don't understand, he said. Mama did it once. Fletcher's glance in Silva's direction was stopped by her wall of reproach. His eyes lowered to the floor, yet no amount of sneaker gazing could evade Silva's stare. He was changing and she knew it. That awkward age where innocence bears a lonely pot, those vines of change hidden behind the shades of adulthood, although they would soon require a larger area to grow. Yet still he was unwise and didn't know it, stuck within that ignorance or recklessness that often sat betwixt childhood and adulthood. He looked to me and smiled daringly. We have to, he said. Fletcher, I chided. Miss Burney, it's what anyone would do, he said. Still, that's no way to walk in the door. Miss Silva worried sick about you and you come home talking like that. But, he started, but nothing, I said. You've been gone off to the city and they missed you like crazy. You don't even think to ask how they're doing or tell them you love them. They know I love them, he said. Then act like it. Your mission means nothing, son, if you don't take care of home. You take care of the people you love and the rest will fall into place. Yes, ma'am, he finally said, still that wide-eyed boy with sticks in his hands and curiosity in his heart. That from toys to tools, that vigor had reared inside him and would eventually lead him away, just as it did every child, leaving Silva to pray like every Black mother during those times. This simple prayer saying, Dear Master, let your grace be upon this house on this day. Teach my children to pray, Lord, and keep them in your will. Deliver them from those wicked ways and all those who would mean them harm. Save them from the hands of man and give them your peace. Grant them access to your kingdom, Lord, and allow them a full life, that they would know you, that they would know who and whose they are. If it be your will, let it be so. Seated beside Fletcher with her eyes already in mourning, I knew Silva prayed this prayer and that her heart sat painfully aware that the battle she'd fought now belonged to her children, and she cursed all those things that killed the dreams she had for them. So with that, I want to stop reading. I want to stop reading and go through some questions that people have posed and spend a little time in the ask a question part. Okay, so, oh no, okay. So I'm gonna go with the ones with the top votes. The first question, are there any characters that you can identify with, and if so, why? I would say each character is very unique, and this is definitely a work of fiction. Luckily I'm not represented in any of the characters, although there are pieces of of me, I think that can that show in certain characters. I think I identify with Fletcher. Fletcher is probably my favorite character, and it's his search for identity. I also search for identity. I think we all do. There's a process of growing up, and we search to find out who we are and who we will become. And Fletcher's search for identity resonated within me. It was different from mine, and I liked the fact that his search was different from mine because he is not me. I want to say that, but anyone's search for identity really resonates within me, and so I definitely identified with Fletcher the most. And the next question I have here is, how did you come up with the title? How did you come up with the title? This was not the first title for the book, but it was the best title. This title, I really wanted to think about, because for me, the story revolves around Fletcher. There are lots of characters in this book, but Fletcher's story really resonated within me. And as I watched Fletcher go throughout the novel and his progression, much of his life was shaded. It was colored by people around him, by what they said of him. So he didn't know who he was, and his search was for who am I? And so I chose the title Pale because of a pale color and the idea that pale color can easily take on other colors. And this was a character who, in his search for identity, was continuously being told who he was by others around him. And because of that, I chose the title Pale. Okay. If there's a takeaway from the book, I think if there's a takeaway from the book, what would it be? I think the biggest takeaway for me in this novel is trying to understand those who are different from us. So much of this novel is about hurt and hurt people hurting people. And it seems only one person in the story is trying to understand other people. Others are just in their own hurt, in their own shame, in their own anger. And this idea of understanding people, understanding other people is lost. And the one thing I think we need right now the most, I said this in a talk last week, is understanding. We need to try to understand others around us, those who are different, understand motivations. A big part of writing this novel, I was asked last week about writing a villainous character like the Missus. And I said it was all about trying to understand her, because I wanted to know how a person could be so who could be so evil. And I wanted to be fair in that assessment of the person, because I don't think people are all evil for the most part. I believe that we're shaped and we're whittled away, and sometimes what's left is this bitter core. And I wanted to write a character where we got to see her from the beginning. We got to see glimpses of her past and see what she became. And so my biggest takeaway from this is that I hope through the reader's exploration of the characters, they also get an understanding of other people, and we as a society grow to understand other people, and people understand Black people too. So. Okay, do I have a favorite passage or quote or chapter? Oh, thank you, Jamie. Do I have a favorite chapter? I think my favorite chapter would have to be chapter 8. This was a chapter that Annie and I spoke a lot about. And then once I worked with my editor, we spoke about this chapter. This is one of the chapters where, as I read it over and over and over, I think it was the shortest chapter, and it spoke a lot about the African-American experience. And it meant a lot to me because I wanted to talk about the African-American experience. And it's also one of the few chapters where Bernice really lets loose. She's a narrator who keeps things pretty tight to the vest, and she doesn't open up a lot about her own emotions. She really reflects those around her. And this was an opportunity that she took to really express a lot of her feelings. And when I wrote this chapter, I was really surprised by it. And then I was pleased with it once it was written, because this was a narrator who did not speak very much. And all of a sudden she was speaking a lot. And I was like, okay, we'll go with it. Thank you, Jamie. Did you have any backstory for the misses or any other characters that didn't make it into the novel? Oh, thank you, Sarah. So there was backstory for Bernice that didn't make it into the novel. It was there, but then it didn't make it into the final bit, that Bernice was actually a teacher. And in understanding Bernice's use of language, I think it's important to know that she was a teacher. In the story, we find out that she reads a lot, and she read a lot during her childhood. And so in addition to that reading, she has the diction that she has because she's a voracious reader and she was a teacher as well. And so that part didn't make it into the final bit. I don't think it is in there. It's been a while since I read it, but she is a teacher, and that little bit didn't make it in. As far as the misses, most of her backstory that needed to be told made it into the novel. But the missus has so much to her. If I could explore her upbringing in Arkansas, I would do it in a heartbeat. There will not be a sequel, but if I could, I would want to explore more of her and more of Fletcher and what, his life. Thank you, Sarah. From the edits that were made, which part was the most difficult to edit out? Oh. Annie and I actually didn't cut huge chunks. Thank you, Dahlia. We didn't cut huge chunks from the book. Most of it was because the novel actually shrank by 10,000 words. And most of that was really paying attention to the language and wanting the novel to be as concise as possible, and use language in an interesting way to tell the story. And so we didn't cut out huge parts. I think Annie and I worked the most on the end. The ending of a novel is always tricky. And so I think Annie and I went back and forth 3 or 4 times just on the ending alone, which was killing me by the end because I just wanted it to be done. I said, okay, I've written this thing. I don't care about the ending anymore, but she really pushed to make the ending as perfect as it could be. And I appreciate it because it worked. Thank you, Dahlia. Oh, thank you, Christy. Who is the novel dedicated to? For those of you who have your copies and those who will receive it, you'll see that it says for Sister Lewis. And Sister Lewis was one of the most influential people in my life. I was lucky to grow up with very strong women, both grandmas and Sister Lewis, who lived down the street from one of my grandmas in Memphis. And I spent lots of time at her house after school, just there waiting for the bus to come to go back home. And she taught me so much about being an African American, pursuing education, not being intimidated, just really growing into my own. And when I wrote a story about a young African American seeking his identity, it had to be dedicated to Sister Lewis, who's no longer with us. But I had to dedicate it to her because she shaped me more than a lot of people, probably the most out of anyone I know. So thank you, Christy. What does literary success look like to you? Oh, honestly, I've had to think about that a lot, and it really does look like one person and taking something from the book. I've changed my notion. I think when you are trying to become a writer, you think that literary success looks like being a bestseller. It looks like being on the Oprah Book Club, which, I mean, I'm not turning it down, right? I don't turn that down at all. However, if one person takes something from my novel, and I've already had that, I've already had someone reach out. I've had many people reach out and say that they took something from it, or they related to it, or it's true. If somebody says it's true, it's fair, they related to it, those are the words, and that's literary success. It doesn't come with anything else other than that. So thank you, Dahlia. You can really feel the South in your writing, that sense of place, as you called it. How do you keep that connection, that deep connection, while living in LA? Thank you, Indy. Thank you, Indy. I think it's something that you have to work towards. I think because I love the South so much, and I remember it so well. And it's still in the stories that I hear from home. So it's there with me no matter where I go. When I travel around LA, I'm still from Tennessee. I'm still country, you know. But yeah, I think it's just with me, and I never want to lose it. And I stay connected to it by being connected to my past, being connected to the stories that I still hear from home. And that's the way I stay connected while living in fast-paced LA. Thank you, Indy and JT. Okay, we're going through these questions. We're almost there, y'all. What is your writing process, and how do you get through writer's block? Writer's block for me, well, first the writing process. I'm a discovery writer. I say this all the time. I don't know the plot. I don't know characters. I start with a setting or a person. This story started with Bernice, and I asked questions. And the first question I had to ask, because it came from a dream, was the first sentence was, "He was supposed to send for me, but never did." That's the sentence I woke up with from the dream. And from that sentence, I had to figure out who was supposed to send for her. Where is she? What's happening? And each sentence is asking another question and trying to answer that question. And so it allows the story to happen very organically, and it allows for me to be surprised as I write, because there's certain things that characters say that it surprises me because I didn't think it was going to happen. And then how do I get through writer's block? I typically will go on a walk, and I'll come back and try to describe the walk. Has nothing to do with the book. I just need to start writing again. Or I'll look at a picture. A lot of times I don't want to leave my computer because I don't want to have to take the walk and come back and deal with getting settled again. So I'll look at a picture online, and I'll try to describe that picture in as much detail as possible. And then I use that. I'll somehow find a way to put it in the story if I can. If not, it just helped me to get past that momentary period of writer's block. Yes, have I written anything else? I am currently working on my second novel. Annie is gracious enough to have received the email, and is going to be reading it, and we're going to start the process, hopefully, of trying to revise it and make it the best it could be. But I'm really excited about the second book, and it's set in West Memphis, Arkansas, a place that is right across from my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. So this second book is my new project, and I'm really excited about it. How did I select the names for the characters? It's funny enough, we had a family friend named Mr. Fletcher, and we used to go to his farm. And so Fletcher came to me easily. I knew that Fletcher's name would be Fletcher. I had a neighbor who had chickens and a peach tree, and her name was Miss Bernice. So Bernice got her name pretty easily. Miss Lula was just a Lula from the beginning. She was a Lula, and George was a George. And Silva was how strong she is. Silva was Silva. It's certain names that just evoked the person they were. And Miss Lula sounded like a flower, a beautiful flower. And she got her name from that. Silva was very strong. And so she got her name from the strength that I found in the name Silva. Thank you, Dahlia. Would you consider writing a story about Bernie and make her the main character? Bernie is more of an observational narrator. She has a story, an interesting story, I believe. But I think I would follow, if I wrote anything else about these characters, I would follow either Floyd, because he's overlooked, but he's an interesting man. I think when you get to the end, you see some interesting sides of him. I would really want to look at his life and what it's like to work for a white family your entire life. That's a little more interesting to me. So I would want to follow Floyd. How many rewrites did you and the editor make before publishing? Thank you, Jay. I had to do my edits in 2 weeks with my editor. So we went one pass. We had one pass at this thing, and it is what it is. But no, it was Annie and I had done so much work on the book, and once we got to the editorial phase, it was actually really refreshing because my editorial notes from my editor were 4 pages, and most of it was, I love this, I love this, I love this, and then it was, look at this, let's try to make this a little stronger. But the rewrites were really easy. The work with Annie took about, I want to say 2 to 3 months. Yeah, just the writing process is, I write all day when I write. I like to start in the morning and take a brief break for lunch. And then I write, and then I take a brief break for dinner, and I write into the evening, and then I don't sleep because I have insomnia when I write. And so I stay up most of the night taking notes on my iPhone in the notes feature, and then I wake up the next morning early and do it all again until it's done. I wrote Pale in a month because I needed to get it done, and because the insomnia is really bad when I'm writing. And this new book, I did the exact same process. It took a little longer, but I stretched it out. But I write all day when I write.
Edward, I think yes. We have time for one more question.
One more. Thank you. That's a fun question to end it on. Nice. Could you see this as a movie? If so, yeah, you want to write it? That's awesome. I would love for this to be a movie. I actually spend a lot of time with my writing partner, Joseph Charney, and we work on projects, and we have a screenplay that we've worked on. And so I could see this as a movie, and maybe it's something that my writing partner and I will take a stab at once we finish work, not work on the screenplay that we have, but once we get that screenplay out, yeah, something we can maybe do. But no, thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you. And I think Vroman is going to join us again. Yes.
Yes. Give me a second. All right. Well, thank you, Edward, for your great talk. It was lovely having you. And thank you to all of you who tuned in this evening. It's Friday evening, so we definitely appreciate the time and support. Again, please consider supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of Pale. Just click on the green button below the viewer screen. We are selling audiobook and ebook versions of the novel, and I included the links in the chat, so if you can just scroll through the chat, you'll find them. Also, if you like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. And have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.